Sitting out there in Louis.
2074. Welcome to Tucson and the Division Executive Council meeting of Sons of Confederate Veterans. It's my honor to introduce National Coordinator of our Vision 2016 program, Dr. Tom Hitter. Hitter. First I've heard of it. And thank you for traveling so far to see us. Please, everyone, join me in honoring the colors. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Sir, I'm filming.
If you are a veteran, you can render the hand salute. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Star Spangled Banner flag.
Salute to the Confederate flag.
Wait a minute.
Oh. Thank you, Kurt. Salute to the Confederate flag.
I
Salute the Confederate flag with affection, reverence, and undying devotion to the cause for which it stands.
Please let's pray to the God of our fathers. Thank you, Father, for sending your Son Jesus, whose passion was to continue your work and set us free from ourselves, the world, and the devil. Help us to remember our Redeemer while we promote the truth about the Southern cause, and certainly it will be so. Now our division adjutant will lead us in the read us the charge.
To you, Sons of Confederate Veterans, we will commit the vindication of the cause for which we fought. To your strength will be given the defense of the Confederate soldier's good name, the guardianship of his history, the emulation of his virtues, the perpetuation of those principles which he loved and which you love also, and those ideals which made him glorious and which you also cherish.
Dr. Head.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want everybody to reach in your pocket or your purse if you're carrying one. I got a feeling there won't be too many of those here, but there may be one or two. Get some object, some physical object take just a minute to do that. Think carefully about what you're getting and why you're doing it. All right, let's start on the back row, in the back corner. I want you to stand up, tell me your name, your camp, and what you've got that you just picked out of your pocket, and tell me what it has to do with the SCV.
Bob Pasco, Camp 2096. I've got myself a car key and a rope, and I have no idea what it's my,
That's how you get to meetings, right?
I got here.
Okay, good.
Clyde England, Camp 2096, Division Commander. I've got my phone, so if anyone from the SCV wants to get a hold of me, they can.
I'm Jim Lyons, I'm Camp 296, 296, shooting the back.
And what's that got to do with the SCV?
Kept their nerves settled.
That's good. That's a good answer.
Yes.
It's also that chewing tobacco is a traditional Southern thing, so you're honoring your Confederate ancestors. I've got a book about the 23rd Virginia Infantry that says there was one particular regiment that you could always tell when they drew up for inspection, because there would invariably be a line about 5 feet out of tobacco juice, because everybody in the unit, everybody in the regiment chewed tobacco. And the ones back in the ranks might turn to the side and spit. The ones in the front rank just spit it straight out. And then you could always tell it was the 23rd, because there was a line of amber right along 5 feet in front of the regiment. Let's go on across.
Kevin Brown, Camp 223, 2233, it's that near. Got to work, Buffalo Head, Buffalo Head on.
And what's it got to do with the SCV?
Damn, not a damn thing.
Yeah, you do.
Except that we want your last nickel every time you turn around.
I am behind on my dues.
Okay.
Corporal Hunter Quest, Division Camp. I have my mechanized cavalry coin. It's always when my group gets together and we're on a bar and the first one put it on the table, the rest have to buy you around.
Understand coins. Okay?
Carter Power, 1708. Wallet. Actually allowed me to fly down here.
Gibson, 1708. I have my membership card from the Sons of Confederate Veterans.
Excellent. That pretty much tells us what that's about, doesn't it?
Kurt Tipton, Camp 1710, the challenge coin that 1710 sold several years ago. Of course, it carries our logo, and this appeared on eBay once. Somebody thought it was authentic Civil War weapon.
You didn't disabuse them of that, did you?
No, then, you know, it was going for a couple $100.
Wow.
Bob Massey, Camp 1525. Got hearing aid batteries in case the power goes out. I won't miss anything if I need it today.
Good.
Joe Dunlap, Camp 2201, and I got $3 in my pocket, which means I probably have to hit the ATM.
And what's that have to do with the SCV?
You still got to pay your dues.
I still got to pay my dues, there you go.
Okay, good.
Thank you, sir.
Don Rogers, Camp 2074. Took out a pocket knife because what it reminds me of is my mother would always say to my daddy, "Charlie, you have your pocket knife with you?" And he would answer, "I have my pants on, don't I?" And what that has to do made me think of my mother. And the whole time I was growing up, she had the print of Jefferson Davis sitting on the porch at Belvoir, hanging on the wall. And so whenever I think of the SCV or whatever, my mother was a strong influence on me.
Wonderful. I didn't pull out my pocket knife because my pocket knife is hidden behind a sign in the Paducah airport. When I got up at 3 o'clock the other morning to come here, I didn't remember to take it out of my pocket, and so I hope it's still there when I get back. Usually that's what I use, and I feel naked without it.
My name is Dan Huskisson, Commander, Camp 1525, and I got a pocket knife from the NRA that I've been carrying for about 20 years because it means a lot to me, same as the SCV.
I took out a pair of glasses so I can see what's going on here.
Yes, you have a chair.
I'm Tom Todd, a commander of the newest Camp 2233.
Jerry Millis, I'm the adjutant of the 2233. And I got a set of car keys that allowed me to get down here in spite of some obstacles yesterday. And I have been on a trip through the South, visiting places my ancestors fought.
Richard Montgomery, Camp 1202. I pulled out a pen, and this pen allows me to convey my ideas and my impressions of this SCV meeting into hard copy.
Great.
Scotty McLaughlin, Camp 2074. My cell phone, to keep in contact with the guys. It works too. Only when he answers it. Yes, sir.
Paul Tippett, Commander, Camp 2074. I got a dollar, which has George Washington on it, who was the patriotic symbol for our entire movement. It ended up on our Great Seal.
Hi, Gregory Bowman, Commander, Camp 1202. I pulled a quarter rail, and also George Washington happens to be on there. Claimed by both sides to be the father of their respective countries. And then, at the last minute, I turned it over, and this is one of those commemorative ones, and it has Alabama on the back. So any of you from Alabama, welcome. I visited there, and so the first capital of the Confederacy.
I'm Bobby Morris, past commander of the Arizona Division, currently a chaplain of Camp 1202. I have a 1925 uncirculated commemorative $50 of Robert E. Lee and General Stonewall Jackson on it, a Stone Mountain Memorial, and I'd like to read it, tell you why it's here. It says,
Your arms aren't long enough.
Bobby, you want to hold it over here for you?
the valor of the soldier of the South.
Oh, I'm getting there.
On it.
I'm Glenn Meek, Lieutenant Commander of Camp 4074. I pulled out my little card holder that I usually wear when I go to schools. On it, it's got my name, camp information, SCV logo, and camp colors. So also a great recruitment tool, because people go, what's that? Sit down and talk to them.
Good.
Donnie Davis, Camp 1710, and I pulled out a empty money clip, which has absolutely nothing to do with the SCV.
This does get
We're always short of money.
My name's Tom Hyatt, and I pulled out keys. I use my keys, mostly the car keys, my pickup key, because they get me to SCV stuff. And I have been deeply involved in SCV stuff, deeper than I ever expected to get for the past several years. I grew up in Marshall County, Kentucky. Most of y'all have never heard of Marshall County, Kentucky, and you need not, because you know about it?
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. Until 1950, we were the poorest county in Kentucky. And that's not because the rest of Kentucky's rich, it's because we didn't have any resources except the Tennessee River bottom, and the farmers who farmed the Tennessee River bottom had, at least in the years that it didn't flood, and it usually flooded about every 3 to 5 years. In between, you could grow pretty decent corn down there and make pretty decent whiskey. That's about all it was fit for, but it was fit for that. Then the TVA came in and built Kentucky Lake and flooded all our bottom land, and all that left was the ridgetop farms. And so I grew up in that. We didn't have anything. We cut all our timber off to make whiskey back in the 1850s and to make white oak barrels to be sent to the bluegrass so they could make whiskey and put it in it. And our hills won't grow much. Now it turns out they grow pretty good cattle. And so my parents started buying cows and selling them back in the 1960s. But I grew up on that farm before we bought cows, and I thought happiness was Marshall County in my rearview mirror, with apologies to whoever wrote that song about Lubbock, Texas. And I left just as soon as I could, went to college, and found myself in ROTC. Not for any particular good reason, except that it was mandatory and you had to take it. And I did, and I found out that I loved it, and so in 1968 I was commissioned in the regular Army Infantry, and I went off for the world's longest recorded adolescence. I absolutely had a ball for the next 20 years, well, almost 20 years, because in the dawning hours of Christmas Eve, well, the closing hours of Christmas Eve, 1983, I found myself the only American on the southern tip of the island of Grenada expecting a Cuban invasion, because Castro had promised the Grenadans that he would come back. And so I was down there about half drunk with a .45 lanyarded to my wrist waiting for the Cubans to come ashore. And they didn't, and so the next day I took my usual tour around the island, and also the next day I started bringing my troops back. And I went home to Key West at that time and started looking for an assignment that would get me out of that business. I said, it's time to grow up. And I got an ROTC job, and at that ROTC job, got recruited by a local guy to join the camp, the SCV, which is how I come by a 4-digit membership number, if any of you care about that. I've been in the SCV since 1984. I did nothing, except I was a camp officer a time or two, for almost 20 years. Nobody asked me to do anything. I paid my dues every year. Occasionally would go to something at brigade or division level, but not much. And then I served as a camp adjutant, a camp commander, and then went back to doing nothing, because nobody asked me to do anything. Until a couple of guys came and said, would you run for division commander? I said, well, sure, why not? So I did, and I found myself division commander, and then again, and then again. I served 3 times, 6 years as Kentucky division commander, and thought I would quit again and go back to doing nothing. And Michael Gibbons called me up and said, I want you to be the chief of heritage defense. And so I did that, and that brings us up to where we're going to start talking with Vision 2016. In between, I retired from the Army. As a regular Army major, was commissioned lieutenant colonel in the Maryland National Guard. Went back to school at the University of Maryland, got a PhD in ed leadership, and set up my own consulting firm in organizational leadership, and that's where I am today. Except I've retired again, and hope to stay so this time, sort of. We'll see. Right now, most of what I do, the SCV, is go around pushing Vision 2016. And it's something I believe in, something I think there's a good reason to do, and I am absolutely pleased as I can be that you all have me out here doing this. Now, why would I waste almost 15 minutes of this division's time having you all introduce yourself to one another? This is something I learned in that PhD for organizational leadership study that I did, and I offer it to you. When we came in here, some of you were here. I don't know how many, there's no way of telling, but you were here. Now, physically, your bodies were here, but some of you weren't here. Some of you were still out on the interstate, irritated because you got stuck behind that wreck that somebody else is still stuck behind. Some of you were still out in the parking lot cussing the woman that cut you off and got your parking spot. Some of you were still at the breakfast table being fussed at by your wife because of something. I don't know what. You were somewhere else. When you're in a meeting to accomplish a purpose, you want everybody to be there. You want everybody with you. Now, I'm talking to you as leaders because you all are going to be the leaders in this 2016 program. You are by virtue of the fact that you're here. You're going to know what you're doing. Most of the others will not. Most of the others, 98% of our membership are just like I was for 20 years. I went to meetings, I did what I was asked to do, but other than that, I didn't pay much attention. Now, you all aren't in that category, you wouldn't be here. But even you may still be at the breakfast table when a meeting starts. Take a few minutes at the beginning of every meeting you ever hold. I don't care if it's a Sunday school group, an SCV camp, I don't care what it is. Take a minute and focus everybody on you. An easy way to do that is the way we just did it. There's others, and there's all kinds of books out there. There's 1,000 ideas on the computer. You can download them. Meeting sparklers, or all kinds of names for it. You probably know already what I'm talking about. Use some of that stuff. Those group process techniques are out there, and they're free. And you can use them to get your people focused on your meeting. Now that sounds a little bit egotistical. I'm sorry. It is. And it's supposed to be. You want them in your meeting to help you do something. Hopefully what you're going to do is SCV as far as I'm concerned, but I don't care what else you use it in. I mean, like I said, Sunday school groups, Masonic Lodge, whatever you do, use the same ideas. They're all good. Involving people in their meetings is good. Otherwise, some of the people in front of you are having the meeting done to them. They're not contributing to the meeting, they're having it drilled into them, and they don't like that. Most of us don't. Okay. Can I take this coat off? Anybody object to me taking the coat off? You've seen me, all right? You can all certify to Michael that I wore my coat with all my decorations on it. You've seen it.
You're in Arizona, nobody.
You got your picture taken, you could lose it.
Picture's taken, I can take off anything I want to.
Take your tie off too.
To an extent.
We could go cut it off, you know, like they do up in some of these counties.
I don't think so. Thanks for the offer, but I don't think so.
There's a restaurant.
In the 1880s, the men who fought for the Confederacy began to hold reunions. This was not something subversive. They fought for reasons that most of the people, even in the North, clearly understood in those days. We don't clearly understand it for reasons I'll get into. But the men who fought for the North clearly understood in 1880 and 1890 and 1900 why the men of the South fought for the South. They thought they were fighting for the same thing. There's a difference in definition that can be blamed mostly on political leadership. That's not what we're here to talk about. Just that those men began to hold reunions. And it wasn't something they did secretly, it wasn't something they did undercover, it wasn't something they did in opposition to anybody, it wasn't political. It was the fact that old men who have fought together like to get together. My platoon from Vietnam, 1969, gets together every couple of years. We do that. It seems to be built into us. We like to do that. There's an old movie that some of you, seeing that there's as much gray hair in here as I've got on my head, know that Paul Newman was in a movie with Liz Taylor, and the name of it is gone right now. Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, where this little no-neck monster of a nephew asks, "Why were you jumping hurdles in the middle of the night?" Well, the reason is because he was drunk. But he said, "Because I used to do that." And the kid says, "Why did you try to do something you used to do?" And Paul Newman said, "Because men like to do things they used to do." And that's why they started holding reunions. There was nothing deep about it, nothing hard. They liked to get together and relive old bad times and make them sound better. So do we. That's why our VFWs and our American Legions and our Marine Corps Leagues are all made up of late middle-aged men, by and large, who like to get together and talk about what they used to do and lubricate the conversation with a certain amount of alcohol. So did they. The difference was that in those days, those guys were not only old, most of the ones who started holding the reunions were crippled. We don't think of that today. But for every man who died in that conflict, at least 3 lost a limb. By 1863, the only practical medical solution to a bullet wound was immediate eye amputation. And so we don't realize that north and south, but especially in the south, for every man you saw on a farm, behind a plow, or on the street, there were 2 missing arms and legs sitting at home somewhere. For a whole generation. These are largely the guys who would come to those reunions at first. Where were those reunions held? The Ramada Inn? No. There was no Ramada Inn. Most of them were under canvas. A very few resorts existed, places like Arkansas and Virginia and on the Gulf Coast. But most of our people lived on farms, pretty much isolated in country where there were no cities and no hotels and not even much rail service when they first started. And so reunions were held in fields or in Methodist Sunday school campgrounds or at some other resort area. Springs, in my county, Peggy Ann Springs. It was 3 or 4 related springs and people would come and camp. Under canvas. Well, think about it. You got 20 or 30 or 100 people as old as we are, about half or more of us missing limbs. Who's going to put up the tents in those places? You're going to hire somebody to come do it? Come on, they didn't have any money. The South was destitute until the 1950s. Their sons, their grandsons, and their nephews would come along with them to do that work. If they wanted drinking water, it had to be brought from one of those springs with a bucket and a dipper. Those old guys couldn't do it. Literally, physically couldn't do it. And so, as the 1890s progressed, we're 10, 12, 15 years into this reunion cycle that lasted for a generation. The young guys began to say, why don't we join your organizations? And more their organizations were joining the UCV, United Confederate Veterans. They started off small. There wasn't an idea of a big central organization with members. It was little groups that would band together. And as some of the young men began to say, why don't we join? The veterans discussed it, they voted on it, and they said, no, let the war die with us. The organization will die when we die. And so, obviously, not everybody felt that way. Some thought there was merit in having an organization for the young guys, and they started the Sons of Confederate Veterans for that reason. That's who they were. They were literally the sons and grandsons of the old vets. They had been meeting, some of them, by 1906, when we got our charge, some of them had been meeting for over 20 years themselves. The SCV was not something brand new that Stephen Dill Lee invented. The SCV was an existing organization 20 or 25 years old, and Stephen Dill Lee simply gave them a charge. But that charge continues to be our charge today. And it is a good one. It is a valid one. It is absolutely necessary that somebody carry on what those old vets fought for. And that somebody is us. Who else is going to do it? What is the charge? At heart, what is the one-line heart of the charge? Vindicate the cause for which we fought. Now, all the other stuff, telling the true history and emulating the virtues, all falls under that. We exist as an organization to vindicate the cause for which they fought. Gentlemen, what was that cause? Anybody want to tell me?
States' rights.
The Southern nation.
States' rights.
particular rights, you know.
It involved states' rights, certainly.
Southern independence from the Union.
Independence, certainly.
Freedom of the
They
individual.
tried to get out of the Union, as they thought, and as most of the North thought they had a perfect right to do under the Constitution.
Freedom of the individual.
Freedom of the individual. Individual freedom and American liberty as we understand it. The ideals of the U.S. Constitution and of the Declaration of Independence. That's what they fought for. How many states tried to secede? 7. 7. Never, ever let somebody tell you the Union was about to be destroyed because half the states wanted to leave. 7 Gulf Coast states plus South Carolina wanted to secede, and Florida, which of course is Gulf Coast and East Coast. 7. Wait a minute, you say. There's 13 stars on the flag. What about the other 6? The other 6 wanted to stay in the Union. The other 6, including my state of Kentucky, and Virginia, and North Carolina, and Tennessee, and Arkansas, and Missouri, wanted to stay in the Union, and the Union wanted them to stay. Now what's unique about that? The fact that they were slave states have anything to do with it, along with Delaware that did not leave, and New Jersey that did not leave, or even try to. There were 8 slave states in the Union, and only 7 wanted to leave. That throws out the idea that it was about slavery, by the way. Somebody wants to argue, well, it was all about slavery, because they do in our classrooms and our textbooks every day. You can, and I hope will, look them in the eye and say, bull. What about the 8 states plus the District of Columbia that were slave states that wanted to stay? Well, then why did 6 of them leave between May and November of 1861, after the war was underway? Why would close to half the Confederacy leave after the U.S. declared war on the 7th? Because they were invaded. Because Abraham Lincoln sent armies to march across their borders and invade not only them, but the South, in support of a completely unsupported theory that it was impossible to get out of the Union. Lincoln himself had campaigned in 1858 on the right of states to secede. But in 1861, when it was about to happen on his watch, and he was about to lose 90% of his revenue from the Southern force, he was willing to invade 6 southern states, 7 really, to get at those 7, and when they left, he pretended that they had not. Okay, that's my political lecture for the morning. That is the cause. The northern 6 Confederate states mostly seceded because they were invaded. And they didn't like it. Well, I wouldn't like it either. You wouldn't like it either. None of us would like it. So what did they fight for? What was the cause for which they fought? Freedom. States' rights? Sure. States had a right to leave. Do states have any other rights? Not according to our present administration. States are sub-entities under the one big government that's called the United States. That is the official theory. Democrat, Republican, I don't care what your political stripe is, our national leadership today, as established by U.S. Grant and Robert E. Lee at Appomattox in 1865, have agreed that the United States is one. E pluribus unum. We have one country, and the states are subordinate to it. So was the South fighting for states' rights? In that they saw the South as each state being sovereign? Yes. Were they fighting over slavery? Yes, they were. Not for Southern slavery, but for the concept of property, and slaves were property. Who did they have to rely on for that? Who had recently in 1860 established that? The U.S. Supreme Court had established that in the Dred Scott decision. So was slavery involved? Sure it was. Was economics involved? Sure it was. Most of the northern revenue came through the southern ports. Remember, they didn't have the income tax yet. You can't have an income tax when you're a union of sovereign states. You can have an income tax when you become one country. And so now they get their money out of us, the IRS, every year. But they couldn't do that then. So there was certainly an economic base. Was there a sociological base? Absolutely. Different people altogether in the South from the North. We were then, we are now. We feel it, I think, perhaps in the Old South more than you do out here. The West has successfully integrated a lot better a bunch of Yankees that we just can't get to think like Southerners. But you all are able to take Northerners and Southerners and make them think like Westerners. I congratulate you on that. But we can't. And it may not work too well out here.
No, no.
The values of the South pretty much permeated the whole West. The North still is pretty much fixed up there and in that line along the Canadian border out to Oregon and Washington, where practically nobody can think anything.
You're right. You used to live up there.
Okay, so where are we going with all this? Just here. We don't live in the same world that they lived in. We have, largely because of the political changes that took place in this country as a result of the war, not directly of the war, but of the aftermath of the American Empire period. The expansion to the Pacific, the coming to world dominance of the United States after World War I, the progressive political movement, for all of that stuff has changed us. We are no longer a country that can simply debate between the Puritan Yankee myth in the North and the Scots-Irish Cavalier myth of the South. We are not. We are now in the hands of two political philosophies, one of which is Marxist, and that believes that the social good is more important than the individual good, and of the Yankee myth itself, which argues that the individual is worthwhile, but only in a collective way. The Southern ideal of individual responsibility, individual accountability, and individual rights to success is simply not being promoted anywhere at the national government level. Some of us still, I mean, we hear it about Arizona. I don't know what you all think about it, but we in the East deeply admire some of your leading political figures, because they're standing up to the system. That's the Southern way, is to stand up to the system, right or wrong. Just the willingness to stand up and say, wait a minute, this is how I see it. That's what the South was all about, and I think still are. But because the politics have changed so dramatically, we now live in a time when the North, descendants of the Union soldiers, and mostly the other 70% of the North that came in since, haven't the slightest idea what we're about. They turn to their political leaders to get that answer. And the Marxists and the Yankees both tell them it was about slavery. The South is wicked, nasty, evil people. We need to convert them all to think like us. Well, so do the Marxists. Everybody thinks you ought to think like a Marxist. And that we dig our heels in and say, whoa, hold it, stop. That's not true. Makes us the continuing target of their ire. Well, we are the only ones left with the charge to promote the cause of the Confederate soldier. Nobody else cares very much. And if we don't do it, in another generation, it will be true that the Confederate soldiers and the German Nazi soldiers were two of a kind. We will all, our grandchildren will be ashamed of their ancestors if we leave it up to the public schools and the popular media. We are the last line. We are all there is. And gentlemen, our organization has that job, and we're organized to put up tents and carry water. It cannot be done. The SCV, as it was organized 3 years ago and still is today, is designed to function exactly like we were in 1900. We have taken no advantage whatsoever of the 20th century. That whole 100 years is just gone. All the things that industry and business and academia learned for 100 years we've ignored. We are organized in camps that rarely even communicate with their divisions. Camps who are dedicated to being isolated individuals who set their own goals and objectives and do it their own way.